I was at the point where I was talking about the options that we have. So first option is that Jackson is correct, that there is no physical effect, no difference in a physical effect between when you and I look at the stop sign and when Mary looks at the stop sign. Now, if that is the correct option, if that is the correct conception of what's going on here, then we're forced into epiphenomenalism, or worse, we're forced into occasionalism. And I don't know if you guys remember occasionalism, but it's that there's this series of physical events, there's a series of mental events. They somehow are going on at the same exact time, but they're not causally related to another at all. So that's actually number 3 on my list here. That's if there's no difference of physical effects between us looking at the stop sign and Mary looking at the stop sign. Now, if there is a difference in physical effects, we have 2 options. First is that when you or I or anybody else out in the real world looks at stop signs, we all have the same physical effect in our brain. And then when Mary looks at the stop sign, she has a different physical effect in her brain. This would imply physicalism, but that does not seem to be supported by our current science of vision. Color vision in particular seems to show that there is variance in the physical effects of when I look at a color and when you look at a color, the same color. So that's option 2 here, that when I look at the color or when I look at the stop sign, some physical event happens in my brain. When you look at the stop sign, some different physical effect happens in your brain. And then when Mary looks at the stop sign, some third different physical effect happens in her brain. And that implies dualism, but that does not imply epiphenomenalism, and it does not imply occasionalism. It just implies that there is something different, the mind, at work when we all look at colors. This works for any qualitative experience, any qualia. So now I'm going to cover one objection to this view, and this is an objection from natural selection. So the idea here is, why would natural selection produce in us a bunch of phenomena, these mental events, that have absolutely no role in adaptation? Because they wouldn't enhance our fitness and they wouldn't reduce our fitness under this picture that Jackson has presented. So it seems crazy for natural selection to do this. Our mental lives, our cognitive experience is such a huge part of our lives, our behaviors, our actions, everything, that they would have just emerged without having any kind of adaptive function just seems crazy from the point of view of natural selection from evolutionary biology. So this seems like a great argument for physicalism and against epiphenomenalism, that it's such an important part of our survival, our mental lives, that it had to have been selected for. The only way that it could be selected for, the only way that it could have emerged within the process of natural selection is if it was physical. Natural selection cannot produce non-physical things like a soul. That the soul can't arise from natural selection alone. It has to arise from something else, something outside of the picture of science. If natural selection did select for mental states, because remember, natural selection is just a quick and dirty solution for the problems of survival. And so let's say we're having some problem of survival, humans, like, we keep walking into fires and burning to death. So natural selection finds a quick and easy solution for this: mental state pain. And then all of a sudden we stop walking into fires and we are able to survive better. So pain in particular, maybe not color sensation, but there are some cases of color sensation that help us with survival. But pain, very much so, helps us with survival. It helps us avoid things that can kill us. These mental states that we have, they seem very beneficial for survival. If they were selected for survival, then they have to be physical. Therefore, mental states are physical states. And so here's the argument, right? 1, mental states are extremely important for survival. If mental states are evolutionary selected for survival, then they are physical. Therefore, mental states are physical states. Okay, so how does Jackson respond? His response is also from evolution. So he's going to try to exploit natural selection to give us the opposite conclusion. So give us the conclusion that epiphenomenalism is an okay thesis for us to endorse, and we shouldn't lose any sleep over it. It's okay. What does he say? He says that some traits are not conducive for survival. So there are ways of having fitness conferring adaptive properties that carry along some unavoidable or inevitable drawbacks or burdens. And he goes to this example of polar bear coats. So it's an evolutionary adaptation to have this white coat. It's the best for camouflaging in the ice and snow, which allows them to hunt and be more successful in their hunts. But it's not the best for warmth. A black coat would be much better. So it's this trade-off. In order to eat, to hunt, they had to be white, but then they take this loss. There's some loss involved because it's being white instead of dark is worth the benefits for conferred in camouflage. So being able to hunt better overrides the loss of warmth that a white coat provides rather than a dark coat. So if they had dark coats, they wouldn't be able to hunt that good, but they'd be warm. And natural selection, this process that, you know, we talk a lot about natural selection, like we anthropomorphize the process, but it's really like it's void of any kind of care or concern. It's just what's going to be the best for survival. Hunting is more important than keeping warm. There's other problems with this polar bear's coat as well. So it's also really heavy to be white. The protein out of which it is composed has to be packed together closely. The number of follicles required to make it so white that seals can't detect it. The difference in graininess of the coat in the snow also requires that the coat be extremely heavy. There's no evolutionary process where the polar bear's coat is white and not heavy. So the heaviness is not selected for. It has no effect on the camouflage whatsoever. It doesn't reduce or enhance the camouflage. It is causally irrelevant for the camouflage. What's Jackson's point is that natural selection can carry along traits that are adaptationally neutral. So it's not that crazy to think that natural selection as a byproduct produces these kind of traits that have no adaptation whatsoever. So sure, we think that mental states are this big part of our lives, and that leads us to think that there has to be some adaptive benefit for them. And for it to have an adaptive benefit, it has to have some kind of physical effect. Like how could it have emerged without an effect? It would have to have been just a byproduct. So not selected for, something else was selected for, and then it's a byproduct that arises. So just like the white coat is what's selected for, the heaviness is just a byproduct. The heaviness of the coat is not selected for, it's a byproduct of selecting for the whiteness. Jackson's going to say that the same type of process might have occurred with our mental states. So maybe some neural state is selected for, and as a byproduct, we get these mental states have no effects, just like the heaviness have no effects, adaptive effects, but they're a byproduct. They happen kind of as an accident, but not really, because it's just a necessary consequence of selecting for the trait that actually matters. So we're very familiar with these byproducts in evolution. And Jackson was to say that what's going on with our mental states, this is just another example. But this has some serious implications for science, and a bunch of objections from science arise from it, from epiphenomenalism, from the idea that our mental states don't have any kind of physical effects. If Jackson is correct, then there are events in our world that have zero effects whatsoever. So mental events would have no further consequences. They don't increase or decrease entropy in the universe, pushing or pulling molecules, change the shape of electric discharges, nothing. And other than mental states, everything else in the world has some physical effects. Everything. So this would be the one thing that has no physical effects whatsoever. It's a total dead end in the history of the universe. That it does not leave the slightest mark in the trail of the history of the universe, not even nothing. And that looking outside of natural selection, outside of biology, it goes against fundamental science. This the broader picture of science. This is contradictory towards that broader picture. It goes against the principle of sufficient reason. So even if evolution allows for the possibility of byproducts with zero effects, science more broadly, more outside of natural selection, outside of biology, says that there has to be some effects. So the burden of explanation rests on this epiphenomenalist of how is it that everything in science, everything has some effects. Even the polar bear's heavy coat has some effects. It slows down the polar bear. That actual heaviness, right? That's a primary quality. Mass, heaviness, that has physical effects on the polar bear. Mental states, the analogy with the polar bears doesn't really fully capture what is at stake when we say that mental states have no physical effects whatsoever, because this mental states would be the only thing in the whole universe that doesn't have this property of having any kind of physical effects whatsoever. So that's actually where I'm going to call it here.